Good morning. It's tax time. It's that time of year. And a viewer actually PM'd me something, and it was very interesting sharing her story with me. And this is an issue, is your net income gross? That's the title of the show. The bottom line is everybody takes that gross number. And I think it's called gross for a reason. So on paper, you might look like you got a lot of money. You make six figures. My viewer and her husband, they both work full-time jobs. They have one child. They both work full-time. So on paper, they earn six figures. But in reality, what they actually bring home and put into their bank accounts to pay their bills is a lot less. My viewer shared with me that her husband makes most of his money from bonuses. And his bonuses are taxed 40%. Boom, 40% right off the top. But those bonuses in their entirety are added on to their gross income. And everybody takes your gross, not your net. People lost their houses back in the early 2000s. Remember that housing thing where people were losing their houses because people were given loans for houses they couldn't afford? On paper, they could afford it, their gross income. But when it came to what was actually there to pay the mortgage, it wasn't there. They got a house based on their gross income that they couldn't afford on their net income, and they lost their houses. What's really scary is when you go to look at public assistance. Now, you guys all hear me and you attack me when I rail against the welfare system and the food stamp system and Medicaid. But see, I rail against it because the people who actually may deserve it or should qualify for it aren't getting it. And the people who abuse it, women, for example, who are raising one child on welfare and decide to have two or three more kids and refuse to even get a part-time job. Where there are people with two incomes who don't qualify for any kind of CHIP, the Children's Healthcare Program, that's a federal government program. They don't qualify for food stamps. And yet, at the end of the day, their net income would qualify them for this assistance. But it's not going on net income. It's going on the gross. And I know a little bit about bonuses, my dear viewer. Back when I was working, I worked for a company, and I got a Christmas bonus every year, $1,000. I didn't take home $1,000 because the bonus was taxed. I took home $750. But at the end of the year, my income went up by $1,000. So my income was actually inflated $250. I never took that money home. But at the end of the year, my income looked higher than it actually was. Everybody's does. You get taxed on your gross income, and you qualify for certain assistance based on your gross income. And I submit to you that's not fair. My viewer wrote to me that for health insurance, for example, because on paper, she and her husband make six figures, they don't qualify for the CHIP program. But to put their child on their insurance plan, that would cost them $800. I believe she said $800 a month. If I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll be corrected. But that's a lot of money. So what she does now is she buys her son temporary insurance. It's I've actually never heard of it, but she said it's $75 a month, and she gets 6 months short-term insurance so that her child can go to the doctor and God forbid the emergency room or get the medical care that he requires because they don't qualify for CHIP and yet they can't afford to put him on their health care plan. So that's really interesting. Now, what she said to me, and I agree with her, that she's really sick and tired of the fact that she and her husband have one kid, they both work full-time jobs, and yet these women, mostly women, who have multiple children and refuse to work at all, are getting the Cadillac of insurance plans through Medicaid and through welfare. And she's right. Although I do want to say to my viewer, and I know you're going to be watching, I learned some things about the CHIP program recently. And again, this is interesting because I was in a situation where we started talking about it, and CHIP ain't all that either. I was going to save this for my healthcare thing, but I might as well just say it out now because CHIP has a lot of restrictions. It does. People who have children with rare illnesses or something that most children don't need at their age, well, CHIP won't cover it. And it's hard to find a doctor who will take CHIP that will do this particular type of procedure that someone I know currently needs. And when they finally get it all set and done, it's like, well, there's no code for this procedure because children this age usually don't need it. So if your kid has a rare something that doctors haven't seen before, haven't performed on a child before, well, you're going to have a fight on your hands, a serious one. This young person needs a procedure done. It's not a life-threatening thing, but it's something important. It's very important. It's a form of dental work. And they can't find someone, a doctor, to do it because the CHIP program says they don't have a code for it. When they get a code for it, there's no dollar amount on it, and so it's a big rigmarole. When you hear my series on the healthcare situation that I'm dealing with, I mean, imagine having to deal with that with a child. A child who needs a procedure done to save their teeth, to save their jaw. And you can't get it because CHIP is saying, we've never heard of it before, we don't cover it. Then they say, well, we'll cover it, but we need a dollar amount on it. And the dental practices won't put a dollar amount on it. Imagine that. That's terrible. So CHIP definitely does have its issues. But as my viewer said, you know, we both work our asses off to support our kid. And because of this gross versus net, we look like we're so wealthy on paper at the end of the year, but in reality, you know, we make 6 figures on paper, but in reality, we make middle 2 figures. I think that's really interesting, and it's something we should all think about. I think back to you know, a young person, an adult, a working adult living with their parents. They don't make a lot of money, and their parents may be charging them rent. They may have to provide their own groceries, their own food. The parents are saying, we'll put a roof over your head, but you have to pay everything else. That young person, if they go to say, well, I need some form of assistance, they will take their parents' income. So if their parents are making $200,000 a year gross, they won't qualify simply because they live under their parents' roof. I find this unfair. A lot of parents out there say, I'm not going to throw my kid into the street, but I'm also not going to support them 100% either. Once a child becomes an adult, even if they live with their parents, I believe that their income and only their income should be used when they are applying for any kinds of financial aid for school or government assistance if they need it, food stamps, for example. As long as they have a job, anybody who gets up and goes to work every day is A-okay with Paula Luciano. If you need food stamps, if you need a little help, Go for it. You're paying for it in your taxes anyway. And that's also insult to injury with my viewer. She and her husband pay taxes. A lot of taxes, which is why their income is so different. Their gross and their net. It's all taxes, taxes, taxes. And then, of course, everybody says you got to go with your 401k. You got to put money in there to provide for your retirement because Social Security isn't going to support you. So a lot of shit comes out of your paycheck every week. And I believe that you should be qualified for certain things based not on your gross income, but on what you actually have in the bank, because that's the money you're going to use to pay your bills. If you make $100,000 on paper, you don't have $100,000 for food and health insurance and, clothing and all that. You might have $80,000 or even less. So once again, it's what you have left over after taxes that's going to pay the mortgage, that's going to pay the medical bills. That's what should be considered when you apply for a loan, for a mortgage, or for public assistance. Not your gross, your net, which is often gross. I find it horrible that hardworking Americans can't afford to insure their children. I find it horrible that when the Affordable Care Act came out, my husband and I were overcharged for health insurance based on our gross income, which when we were self-employed, corporate taxes, personal taxes, and all the other shit we had to pay out just because we were self-employed, what we made gross was not anything close to what we had in our bank account. And yet when it came to health insurance, we were charged for health insurance based on our gross income. And that made our health insurance premiums really gross. Way over what they should have been for two healthy people who had never had a health issue. That's how we were judged, by our gross income. They don't care how much you pay in taxes, corporate taxes. We had to pay unemployment tax. We had to pay all kinds of other taxes that most people don't pay. But that gross number, it almost made my poor husband want to make less money on purpose every year. Because we never saw so much of our money, because the tax man came and he took. Another viewer, someone who I am so excited, I'm going to her wedding in July, she wrote that the true definition of socialism is that we make it and they take it. And I think a lot of people nowadays are getting sick of that. We're sick of it. We're sick of being accosted on the street by beggars asking for money. We're sick of seeing our neighbors with their 4 and 5 kids sleeping in while we get up at 5 in the morning and go to work. And knowing that we work so they don't have to. That our taxes go and support them and their choices in life. And while we've been responsible, when we need just a little bit of help, a little bit of something, we're too rich for it. Well, you see how I live. I'm not a wealthy woman. But we have lived a responsible life. And every freaking day, every freaking year, with health insurance, with taxes, we get punished. We get punished for being responsible, for actually working, for living within our means. We get punished for that. I was told at one point, you should have debt because it helps your credit rating. I said, I don't want debt. I pay my bills every month. I don't like paying interest. I pay my credit cards at the end of everything, 100%. Oh, you shouldn't do that. You need to have debt. No, I don't want debt. I like knowing that I don't owe anybody a dime. That everything I have, I've paid for with money that we have earned, me and my husband. But I'll tell you what, at some point, God forbid, if my husband can't work, if something horrific happens to us, I probably won't qualify for assistance. And that scares me because all my life, I've paid my own way. I have. I mean, my mother, I've never asked my neighbors or strangers to pay my way. I've never been on government assistance. I've never taken a dime that didn't belong to me, that either my mom earned and gave to me, or I earned myself, or me and my husband earned together, or my husband earns. We have never taken a dime. Everything we own, we've paid for with our money, not yours. But someday, God forbid, if we need the government, which we have basically been paying in all of our adult lives, every paycheck, we're paying in. Our taxes go to these other people who have not made responsible choices, who abuse the system. That assistance won't be there for us because we've been responsible. We will be punished, just as my viewer and her husband are being punished for working hard to support their child. And at the end of the day, finding that while everything looks good on paper, the gross is actually cool, the net is actually gross. Political Paula, out.